In February 2020, Erdogan visited Kyiv, Ukraine, officially. Business, trade, those usual diplomatic talks. But during the ceremony, something unexpected happened. Erdogan shouted, "Glory to Ukraine!
Glory to Ukraine! Glory to Ukraine!"
Now, pay attention to the context. At that moment, Russia had already illegally taken Crimea from Ukraine. And in eastern Ukraine, a bloody war had already been going on for 6 years against separatist groups backed by Moscow. Can you imagine the weight of that scream? Erdogan, leader of the second-largest army in NATO, from the country that controls the only exit from the Black Sea to the world, shouting a slogan that makes Putin grit his teeth. But there was a problem. A big problem. At the same time, Erdogan was shouting this in Kiev. Turkey was strengthening its ties with Russia. Russian oil was pouring into Turkish refineries. Russian tourists were crowding Turkish beaches. Erdogan and Putin were constantly meeting and making deals. Smiling for the cameras, that shout then seemed like just talk, a performative diplomacy. The sea bridge, a Turkish ferry, approaches the port of Sochi in Russia. On board were eager passengers, prepared cargo, and hopes of reopening a trade route closed for 14 years. Businessmen on both sides of the Black Sea had been counting on this moment. It was supposed to be a victory, a sign that despite the war, commercial life was going on. But when the ship reached Russian waters, silence took over. The authorities in Sochi do not respond. The captain tries to make contact. Nothing. Hours go by. Then comes the first excuse. Military exercises in the area, then missing documents, and finally, security issues.
Normally, all our legal permits, our departure authorizations, are valid for both ports. We began our first passenger trip on Wednesday. But for a reason we don't exactly know why, we waited 2.5 days in Russia. All the documents were in order, there was nothing wrong, and even with a high number of passengers, especially Russians, the passengers were dropped off at the entrance.
Then comes the humiliation. Russian divers go down and inspect the hull of the ferry for 8 hours, as if it were an enemy ship carrying weapons.
Divers who weren't from the area started diving around it, checking for any security vulnerabilities. There's a problem now because of the war there, and that's why they look at all the ships with suspicion. They take their own precautions, but we haven't had any problems with that. We couldn't get close anyway, they didn't let us anyway. We asked for the evacuation of the passengers and they didn't do that either. The country we went to is Russia. The citizens we transported are Russian citizens. In other words, they victimized the citizens of their own country. As a company, we handled all the complaints from the passengers and provided all the support we could.
The governor of the region, Veniamin Kondratiev, released a statement saying that resuming the route is premature and unsafe. The sea bridge remains stranded at sea for days, leaving passengers in limbo. Supplies start to run out. It was then that, on November 9th, with no other choice, the captain turned the ship back to Trabzon, in Ankara, the Turkish capital. This wasn't seen as a misunderstanding. It was seen for what it really was, a public humiliation. Putin was sending a message. It's as if he was saying, I control the Black Sea, I decide who comes in and who goes out. And Turkey, well, they're going to have to swallow that. But Putin forgot one thing. Turkey also has a door, and that door is much more important. Let's move forward 11 days to November 20th. The Astoria Grande, a luxury cruise ship, approaches Istanbul with more than 600 Russian tourists on board. Families, retirees, people who saved up all year for this trip. Istanbul was the jewel of the itinerary. The Blue Mosque, the Grand Bazaar, the bridge over the Bosphorus. The tourists could see the city. They were very close. The lights of Istanbul reflected on the Sea of Marmara. But the ship doesn't stop. Turkish authorities don't give the captain any authorization. The Astoria Grande starts circling for an hour, 2 hours, with confused passengers looking out the window. Istanbul is right there, but out of reach. And then comes the order to turn back, without any explanation, without apologies. The Turkish Minister of Transport, Abdülkadir Uraloglu, later said what everyone already knew. Russia is at war and has encountered difficulties. We will apply reciprocity. You can be sure of that. Reciprocity. Now stop and think about what just happened here. Putin humiliated Turkey because of a commercial ferry. He thought Erdogan would swallow it. That business would speak louder. But what he didn't realize is that Erdogan didn't need an excuse to turn against Russia. He needed a justification, and Putin just handed it to him on a silver platter.
Save Ukraine?
Save.
Because that wasn't just about Russian tourists going back home without seeing Istanbul. It was the end of an era. The era when Erdogan turned a blind eye. When the two of them sat at the table and pretended they could separate business from war. That table just turned. And then things started to escalate quickly, because while those two ships were making headlines, something much more dangerous was happening in the waters between Turkey and Russia. The Black Sea was literally turning into a battlefield. At the end of November, two oil tankers, Keros and Virat, part of Russia's so-called Shadow Fleet, were hit by Ukrainian naval drones. And what's most impressive is that this happened just over 50 kilometers from the Turkish coast, practically in Istanbul's backyard. These drones, nicknamed Sea Baby by Ukrainian intelligence, are small, fast, and loaded with explosives. And they've turned the Black Sea into a nightmare for Russia and Turkey. Well, you've been watching all of this happen right at your doorstep. Now, you need to understand one thing. Turkey has a legal responsibility for the Black Sea. It's called the Montreux Convention, signed in 1936. This convention gives Turkey full control over the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, the only exit from the Black Sea to the rest of the world. And here's the beauty of it. When the invasion began in 2022, Turkey used Article 19 of this convention to close the straits to warships. This meant that the Russian Black Sea Fleet was trapped, with no reinforcements and no way out. Isolated, but now, with ships exploding near the Turkish coast, with drifting mines, with oil polluting the waters, Erdogan had an even better excuse to invoke Article 21, imminent danger of war, and tighten the blockade even further. Putin had provided not only the political justification, he had provided the legal justification. And then comes the other move, the economic one. In October 2025, Turkey was buying 300,000 barrels of Russian oil per day. It was the third largest buyer, behind only India and China. A month later, in November, that number dropped to 200,000 barrels, a cut of 1/3. All of a sudden, that wasn't an accident, it was a message. It's as if Turkey was saying to the Kremlin, "You humiliated our barge, you closed your port to us. So now you'll find out what happens when we close our market to you." But the final move was still missing, the one no one expected. The one that transforms this trade dispute into a historic geopolitical shift. Because, in December 2025, details began to leak about secret meetings between Ankara, Paris, and London. And what was being discussed there went far beyond sanctions or speeches at the Security Council. France, the United Kingdom, and Turkey were forming a coalition. And it wasn't to send weapons. It was to put troops on the ground in Ukraine. Now wait. Stop for a second, because you need to understand the weight of this. Putin spent 3 years saying that NATO troops on Ukrainian soil was the absolute non-negotiable red line. The one thing he would never accept, his nightmare. And now, 3 NATO countries are ready to do exactly that. Now, you might be thinking, wait, troops? Are these soldiers going to fight the Russians? No, not directly. And this is where things get even smarter. The plan is to create what the military calls a reassurance force. French, British, and Turkish soldiers positioned in strategic areas of Ukraine. Kiev, Odessa, the border with Belarus. Not to fight on the front lines, but to ensure that if a ceasefire is signed, no one will break it. And here's where it gets interesting. Because these 3 nations are the only combination that works, and each brings something the others cannot. France and the United Kingdom bring something that no other European country can: nuclear weapons. Both have independent nuclear arsenals. France with the Force de Frappe, and the United Kingdom with the Trident submarines. This creates what the military calls a trigger force. The logic is brutal, but simple. If Putin attacks a French base on Ukrainian soil, he's not just attacking Ukraine, he's attacking a NATO nuclear power. It's like putting a tripwire in the way. If you stumble over it, the trap is triggered. And in this case, the trap could be nuclear. Do you get the game? It's not about fighting, it's about making. It's impossible for Putin to attack without turning this into a war he can't win. France and the United Kingdom provide nuclear deterrence. But who brings the muscle? Who has enough soldiers, enough equipment, and a good enough geographic position to really make this work? Turkey, yes. The second largest army in NATO, more than 500,000 active soldiers, tanks, drones, artillery, and, more importantly, complete control over the Black Sea. Because of the Montreux Convention, remember I said that the convention limits foreign warships? They can only stay 21 days in the Black Sea, and the total allowed tonnage is 45,000 tons. That means the United States, France, or the United Kingdom can't keep a permanent fleet there. But Turkey can, because it's a country on the Black Sea coast. Without limits, Turkish frigates can patrol the grain routes leaving Odessa. They can escort commercial ships. They can create a no-fly zone over the south of NATO. Ukraine and Russia can't do anything to stop it. And there's more, much more. Now comes the part that's probably keeping Putin up at night. The border with Belarus. Right now, tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers are stationed in the north of the country, guarding the border with Belarus. These are some of Ukraine's best brigades. Well-trained, well-equipped, but they're just standing by, just waiting, because at any moment, Russia could try a new offensive coming from the north, like it did in 2022. Now, imagine this. French, British, and Turkish troops take over this border, build bases, install air defense systems, and set up observation posts. What happens to those thousands of Ukrainian soldiers? They become free to move east, to Donbass, to Zaporizhia, exactly where Russia is most stretched, where Putin needs troops the most. Do you understand what that means? The coalition changes the balance of the war without firing a single shot. It's pure chess. You move pieces, free up others, force your opponent to react. And Putin, he doesn't have enough pieces on the board to respond. And here you'll understand why this is a complete disaster for Russia, because this will have an impact on several fronts. First, militarily, the Russian army is bogged down in Ukraine. The best units are worn out, The reserves have been mobilized. Putin has no way to open a new front against NATO troops without turning this into a total war that he cannot win. According to Economico, Turkey has cut its oil purchases. The shadow fleet is being destroyed. In the Black Sea, Western sanctions are tightening. And now, with Turkey further closing access to the straits, Russia is being economically strangled. Third, naval. The Black Sea fleet is trapped. It can't leave. It can't be reinforced. Now, with Turkish frigates patrolling and even operating in the Black Sea, it's becoming dangerous. And fourth, the worst of all, the doctrine that Putin built his entire foreign policy on is dead. For decades, Russia operated with a simple idea for decades. Neighboring countries, what they call the near abroad, are Moscow's exclusive sphere of influence. NATO doesn't come in, Western troops don't set foot. That's the rule, the red line. Putin declared thousands of times that NATO troops on Ukrainian soil were unacceptable, non-negotiable, the very thing he was fighting this war for. France, the United Kingdom, and Turkey are not just crossing that line, they're building bases on it, training centers, observation posts, with the blessing of the international community. And Putin can't do anything about it. And you know what's even more ironic? It all started with a ferry. Now tell me something. Do you think Putin miscalculated by humiliating Turkey? Or was Erdogan just waiting for an excuse to turn the tables? Leave your opinion in the comments, and if this content helped you better understand what's happening in this war, share it with someone who also needs to know this, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. See you next time!